Hello, art historians. Welcome back to our late Europe video 4. And this is the Romantic era, Romanticism video 2. So when last we met, we talked about Romanticism, and we talked about the 5 tenets of Romanticism and those 5 big characteristics that are involved in most Romanticism pieces. So the use of imagination, focus on the individual, an awe of nature, strong emotions and feelings, and the idea of the common man or, everyday life. So this is sort of a weird inclusion because it comes during the period of Romanticism, but it's not exactly Romanticism. It's actually what we refer to as Gothic revival. And so it's this time period where we get so excited about looking backwards, but not back to classical, not our neoclassical, but back to the Gothic, back when things were pointy and things were big and over the top. And so that's what you're looking at here. You're looking at the Palace of Westminster, which is not actually really a palace. It is the building that it's the Houses of Parliament in England. It is a huge complex. This is what is called Elizabeth Tower, and the bell inside Elizabeth Tower, as you may or may not know, is called Big Ben. And in this building are the Houses of Parliament, and in England the Houses of Parliament are broken down into 2 pieces. The House of Lords, which is where all of the people who have titles, Earl this and Duke that and Prince whatever and Lord whatever, that's the House of Lords. That's half of the government. The other half of the government is the House of Commons, and that's where the everyday elected people are. So we do have a little bit of a focus on the common man here. What you're looking at is a huge complex in London on the River Thames. And for those of you that don't know how to spell that, it's Thames. It looks like Thames, but it's Thames. And your architects here are Charles Barry and Augustus W.N. Pugin. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about what the building is and what its job is and why it's important. And then we'll talk a little bit about who those guys are and what they did. So limestone, masonry, and glass. So I'm going to go to the next one because it gives you a little bit of another version of it. Like, it gives you the same image, but it gives you some details to give you sort of the scope of this building. It's 872 feet long. It's gigantic. At its highest, it's 70 feet high. The roof, the up here, 70 feet high. And it's 232 to, in some places, 322 feet wide. You do have a couple of different images. You have Westminster Hall, which is this guy, right? And we'll talk about him. But if you're wondering what those numbers are, this is Westminster Hall. And so you're looking at 75 feet high. Look how tall that is. And 60 feet across. Okay. And then you're looking at one other place, which is the lobby, which is 60 feet across in diameter and 75 feet high. So when we're looking at this 70 feet high here, we're looking at just this like the average height here, but then we have some places that are a little taller in places, and we'll talk about what we're looking at here. All right. So I'm hoping that you noticed that when I was looking at this doesn't look like everything else. Okay. This looks weird and huge. That's a bench for someone to sit on. Okay. This is, at chest height here. This is a gigantic, huge, ridiculous space because this is part of the old portion of the building. Okay, and so we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on here. All right, so I'm going to come back here. All righty, so let's talk a little bit about what you're looking at here. In 1835, there was a huge fire. I'm sorry, 1834. There was a huge fire in London. Huge fire in London. And it burned a good portion of London down. And when that happened, people in England, particularly in London, took that moment and thought, okay, we are in this modern era, and we have all of these factories, and we have all of these steam engines, and we have all of this smoke, and all of this grungy, grimy, ugly, gross. And since we've had this fire, it gives us a chance to sort of like build over. And so when there was this fire in 1834, it meant that there was an opportunity to rebuild. This had happened previously, like in the 1600s, there was a horrific fire that burned down like most of London. And there was a huge rebuilding then. So this isn't the first time that something like this has happened. So the Great Fire of 1834 burned down the Palace of Westminster, the old one. And it wasn't big enough anyway. And so what you're looking at is this palace that has been built on the River Thames. But what you need to know about the River Thames is tidal, which is not really the case with most rivers. And when I say tidal, I mean seriously tidal. Like the height of the river can lower as much as 6 or 8 feet in some places in London when the tide goes out. So what they decided to do is take advantage of this tide, and they built a wall to push the river further inland. Further, like this is the wall right here. And if they hadn't built that wall, the river would be out here where the palace is. But they built this wall and sort of pushed the river in towards us, right? And so they decide that this is what they need to do. They need to build this new palace for the Parliament, for the House of Lords and the House of Commons. And everything is ugly. And so even though the time period is technically Victorian, Queen Victoria was in charge, they decided that they were going to have a contest. And 1835, there was this competition, and you were told that you could either design something in the Gothic style, thus calling it Gothic Revival, or the Elizabethan style, which was the time of Queen Elizabeth, so the late early 1600s. And those were your options. They didn't want anything that looked like what it looked like now. They wanted something big and beautiful and ostentatious. So they got 97 entries to their contest. 91 of the 97 entries were in the Gothic style, because clearly people were looking around them and going, everything is so ugly. Let's build something tall and beautiful. And so what happens is Barry and Pugin worked together, because Barry was an architect and Pugin was a historian. And they worked together to come up with this beautiful combination of sort of the modern and the Gothic. And so Pugin was, like I said, a historian. He studied stained glass. He loved everything that was Gothic. He studied Gothic cathedrals. And Barry was the architect and knew how to make sure everything came together correctly. So they worked together on this because they knew they each had separate skills. Pugin actually wrote a book called, and the title of the book is Contrasts. And what that book Contrast was about how you could, in modern design, combine both the modern and medieval to make it beautiful. And so Barry saw this book and was like, dude, we got to work together on this. And so that's what they did. They worked together to create a building that has over 1,000 rooms. There are over 100 separate staircases. There are 2 miles of corridors. There are modern offices here. And with this Gothic revival, they were able to take the original Gothic style and make modern adaptations to it. So like that thing of pushing the Thames out, it actually allowed them to make a larger building than had been possible on the grounds of the original House of Parliament. There is a concrete foundation. It's now built mostly of stone, so it's much less likely to burn. There's a huge process of ventilation here. This looks like it could be, I'm sorry, this looks like it could be like something where there are offices. This is actually part of the ventilation tower. There are gigantic fans, like huge fans that turn and pull the air from the offices to keep the offices from having stale air in them. It is an incredibly complex building. Let me try that again. The roof is iron, so again, less likely to burn. And it's just for its construction in 1870 is a fairly modern building. This is a really important building too, because what it does is it does do that thing where we talk about the idea of the common man, this idea of combining tradition with modern. It has to have, and what's really cool is there's two separate houses in Parliament. There's the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and the Queen never is allowed to go into the House of Commons. She's not allowed in there. And it's really cool. There's all of this procession about when the people in the House of Lords are allowed to go into the House of Commons for a little bit, and who's allowed to go when, and how she has her annual speech to Parliament. But she has, like, it's all really cool and full of pomp and circumstance. And if you ever want to see really cool governing happening, there is a cable channel where you can actually watch the British Parliament, and it's wild. They yell at each other and they bang on things and they boo at each other, and it's crazy. It's an interest, not crazy. It's just so different from how quiet our houses of government seem to be. It's really interesting. So let me go to the next image here. Oops, sorry, that's the wrong way. So I'm going to go to this one, which is the lobby. And what's really cool about the lobby is this is where you cross through this center lobby, and you would go from, if you go one way, you go to the House of Commons, where the people who are elected are. If you go the other way, you go to the House of Lords, where the nobility is. And what's interesting about this is where it's a huge space. It's 60 feet across, and it's an octagon. And what's really cool about it is on 4 of the octagon sides are these beautiful stained glass windows that Pugin designed. And on the other 4 are the doorways into the various hallways where you can sort of go to other places. Now, what's really, really cool is that above each one of the doorways is a huge mosaic that represents each of the 4 territories that are part of Great Britain. So there's one for England that has St. George above it, because he's the patron saint of England. There's one for Scotland that has St. Andrew above it, because he's the patron saint of Scotland. There's one for Wales, and that's spelled Wales, and that has the thing of St. David over it. And then Ireland, the one for Ireland, has St. Patrick above it. So each country has its mosaic with the flag and its patron saint and some iconography that represents that particular piece of the British Empire. Then what you see all around are all these statues of the kings of England. So it's a really impressive, beautiful space. It's also a space that can be used for meetings between members of Parliament and their constituents, so like the people that they represent. It's a gathering area for members of the House of Commons to speak to the members of the House of Lords. And it's a formal space. It's a beautiful, large, formal space. It really reflects what the country was trying to accomplish here. It reflects what Pugin and Barry were trying to accomplish here. It reflects the need at the time for a particular type of feel from the government, but it also reflects the beauty of what people could accomplish. And it gives the House of Commons a very large space to occupy. And that was really important because previously it wasn't as large a space, and the majority of the space was given to the House of Lords. So it sort of helps with that feeling of equality, I guess. Now, the third image that they give you is really cool. And I told you before, this is a giant, giant space. Here you see some more statues of the royalty of England. So this is called Westminster Hall. And the reason that they include this is because this is still a place that's used for ceremonies and stuff like that. But when you look at it, it's old. Because it's part of the original medieval building that was originally built to be the House of Parliament. And when the fire burned, because so much of it was stone, it didn't burn. So what they've done here is they've included the Westminster Hall in your image. I think why they include it is because I believe that the style of this, it's medieval, but it has lots of really cool Gothic elements in it. And I think they wanted to tie the whole House of Parliament that was going to be built to this that survived the fire. And I believe that is why they chose, when they were selecting the style, why they said it could either be Elizabethan, which would fit with this, or Gothic, which also fits with this. I think that it's a way to make sure that the whole complex has a unified feeling. And so that is the House of Parliament. Now, does it meet our 5 tenets of Romanticism? Well, particularly the lobby, yes. Look at how fanciful the lobby is, right? So we get sort of that idea of imagination. The individual, there are all these statues of people, but we also focus, I'm so sorry, I've been trying not to yawn this whole time. We also focus on, when we say the individual, we're focusing on the individual because we have really set aside a large portion of area for the House of Commons. And it's significant that we have that. Are we in awe of nature? Well, you could argue yes, because literally they moved the whole river. Does it give you strong emotions or feelings? It's meant to give you a feeling of awe. Oh, I'm so sorry. That is my alarm, and I apologize for that. I thought it was on silent. The other thing is the focus on the common man, and we definitely see that here. So when we're looking at this clock tower, it's been renamed Elizabeth Tower after Queen Elizabeth II. Before, I believe it was just called the clock tower. But when you're thinking about Big Ben being in there, it's really interesting when you think about the purpose of a bell like that. Big Ben, when there wasn't so much noise of cars and things like that, Big Ben could be heard for miles. And what's interesting about a clock like this, and what a lot of people don't think, is the average person didn't have watches. The clock is a way, the clock that chimes like this is a way to make sure that everybody knows what time it is. So a clock like this rings differently every 15 minutes. And so when you're thinking about the common man, this bell is really about the common man. At 15 minutes after the hour, it goes ding, 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 ding. Okay, that's it. Ding, 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 ding. 4 bells. Then at 30 minutes past the hour, it goes ding, 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 ding. Ding, 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 ding. So you get 8 bells. Okay. At 45 minutes after the hour, it goes ding, 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 ding. Ding, 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 ding. Ding, 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 ding. So now you've got 12 bells, right? each one of those sounds is identifiable. Oh, I heard 4 bells, it's 15 after. Oh, I heard 8 bells, it's half past. Oh, I heard 12 bells, it's 45 after. Okay. Then at the hour, it does the thing that it does at the 45 minutes. Ding, 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 ding. And then after that, it goes bong, bong for each hour. And so what that accomplished and why that is important is it allows for all of the people around London to be able to function at the same time. They had a shared ability to tell time. And that doesn't seem like it's such a big deal, but it's a huge deal when you're dealing with, people who were poor, when you're dealing with people who didn't have watches, only the wealthiest people had pocket watches and things like that. And it was difficult to know, sometimes if you were working, particularly working, there's no real way to always tell what time it is. So I know that it seems like I'm harping on what seems to be a very unimportant thing, but the creation of that bell, Big Ben, and the ability of the crafters to keep it on time was really, really important for a lot of reasons. Trains, people working, deliveries, modes of transportation, things like that. And so while it looks like it's not a very important piece of Westminster, it actually is. It is that piece that is for the common person. It is that piece that helps them be able to organize. All right, moving on to our next piece. This is a really cool piece. So this is a lithograph. And so what is a lithograph? A lithograph is when you use a fixing substance on glass, and then you can, or on whatever medium you want, and then you can put ink on that fixing substance and then put paper on that ink and pull it up. And it's a very intricate process in today's lithography. And I'm going to show that to you when we do contemporary. We're going to talk about lithographs when we do Andy Warhol. But for now, just know that lithographs mean that you use a fixing method to attach your image to glass. So, actually, I think it's stone. I said glass, but I think it's stone. It's stone. You attach your thing to stone, and then you attach the ink to that, and then you print. All right. So this is also, as you see here, satire. And what you're looking at is you really have to look at the title. Excuse me. Nadar raising photography to the height of art. So Nadar was an early photographer in Paris. And you're dealing with, in 1862, the introduction of photography. And with the introduction of photography, things change drastically in art. And I'm going to talk about that when we do our video on photography in a couple of videos. But what happens here is Nadar was this guy who had figured out a short exposure so that you could take photographs and the exposure would be faster. And he was famous for literally getting in hot air balloons and going up above Paris and taking photographs. And people were concerned about that for several reasons. One, why is this guy up in the sky with all of his chemicals and camera and stuff like that? Couldn't stuff fall down and hurt us? Sure. Two, are photographs really art? At the time, people said no. And so what you see here in the title, it's a joke. Nadar raising photography to the height of art. So what Daumier is saying in this video is that photography is not art. It's not high art. And the only way to make photography high art is to put it in a balloon and put it above the city. Ha, ha, ha. Okay? So Daumier is making fun of Nadar. He's making fun of his use of the balloon. He's making fun of his use of photography. He's making fun of photography as a whole. And he's really talking about the fact that look at the presentation of Nadar here. It looks like he's about to fall out of the balloon. It looks like his hat is coming off. It looks like he's like all over the place, like just gonna fall at any second, and he's like discombobulated. And all of the picture, all of the buildings say photography, 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 because they're not really up in the air. And the only way for them to be high art is to get into a balloon. It's really important that we see that early photography was not seen as art, and early photography was not accepted. And early on, people thought photography was ridiculous. And that is clearly what is shown here. Do I think this is one of the 250 most important images in the history of art? I do not. But I think that the point that it's making, that Daumier and many other artists at the time really believed that photography was a passing fad and was not high art and was not meant to be respected, and that photographers were a little weird because taking a photograph doesn't take as much skill as making art, in their opinion, right? And so Daumier would say to you, well, he takes 3 to 5 minutes to take his pictures, but this takes me hours to make a lithograph. Clearly, my lithograph is art and his photograph is not. And this is important because we see this, even in ancient Greece and Rome, they believed that some artists were more important artists than others. In the early guilds, that some arts were more important than others. And so the irony in the title is, meant to insult. Now, an interesting little thing that comes from this is during the siege, the 1870 siege of Paris, but balloons were actually used to wage war. So while it may not be, as clear here that balloons are balloons are not the focus of this. Balloons actually become really important in Paris in about 8 years during the siege of Paris of 1870. All right, we're going to move on to this. This is the burghers of Calais. And before we go any further, what is a burgher when it's spelled like this? And it's a councilman. It's a member of the city council, okay? And so this is a piece by Rodin. It's in bronze. Now, this is not a lost wax casting. He was able to make multiples of this piece. And there are multiples of them. There is one in Calais. There is one at the Met in New York City. There is one at the National Gallery of Art Sculpture Garden. So he made multiples of this, and that does not lessen their importance. Just because you can make multiples of a statue doesn't lessen how important the statue is or its value. So let's talk about this. So this is by Rodin. Rodin is he is a super famous artist, and you probably know him because he created The Thinker. The guy that's sitting down with his hand under his chin thinking. That's Rodin too. This is probably one of his most important pieces. And it is because in this piece, we really see the ability of Rodin to tell a story. So let's contemplate this. It's story time again, children. All right. So I really do sometimes feel like the granny that's like, gather around, children, let's have story time. Okay, so here's the story. It's 1337. But Mrs. Harmon, this is made in 18. Yes, I know. But it's 1337. And in 1337, we are in the 100 Years' War between France and England. Okay. And it's terrible. There's just like so many bad things are happening, slaughter and death and everything. Okay. And King Edward III of England takes over the city of Calais. And what's important about Calais is the shortest distance between the island of the United Kingdom and the mainland of Europe is between like right near Dover, England, and Calais. And you go back and forth between the two. That's where you make your passing from. So Calais is a really important port because it's where you would go from England to France or France to England. And Edward III of England takes control of the city of Calais. And he tells the city that he will save all of the citizens of the city, but in order to do that, they must give up 6 members of the city council that will be killed. And he says that the 6 members of the city council must be dressed in sackcloth. So basically like clothing that is made from sacks that you would move like flour and wheat and stuff like that. They must hold the key to the city, and they must come down to the city center and present themselves to Edward III's soldiers. And they do. So this statue is of the 6 men, the 6 burghers of Calais that dress themselves in sackcloth and walk themselves down with this key to the city center to be sacrificed. And what you see here is each man showing the emotions that they feel in this moment. This is a really, really romantic with a capital R, statue. And why do I say that? Well, let's think about it. You're going to use your imagination because you're hearing me tell the story, right? You're going to imagine the story. We're going to focus on these individuals. We're going to look at what they were willing to sacrifice. The awe of nature in this one is really more about sort of the idea of them walking into the city center and being confronted with an empty city center except the 6 of them, and they will go to their deaths. So you sort of get this idea of just the picture of what you're seeing. Strong emotions and feelings, absolutely. Appeals to the common man, completely. These were the city councilmen, but they weren't necessarily super rich or super powerful. They were just like, members of the Board of Education, right? And so what they do is they go into this. You see emotions here. Some feel abandoned. Some feel lonely. Some feel devastated. They appear to be a group of 6, but each of them seems to be an individual figure. Their faces show their conviction that what they're doing is right, but there is no joy in it. They know they're saving their city, and they know that it's the right thing to do. But, emotions, fear, resignation. This is what's going to happen to me. Forlorn, complete sadness, sorrow. They're also arranged in a circular composition. So no one of them seems to be really any more important than the other. Okay. And so that's the story that you see here. These men who are together and joined together by anguish and suffering and conviction of duty are also each separate. Clearly, this man is looking off in this direction. This man is looking down. This man is looking off to the side. This man is looking down. I'm going to zoom in so that you can see some of their faces. Here you see, his face of resignation, his face of sorrow. We see these pieces. We see them ready to sacrifice themselves. And then we get into what actually happens in the story. So they all go down to the city center, and they all are ready to sacrifice themselves. And then King Edward III says, "Just kidding." But he literally leads them right up to the point that they're about to be killed. And then he says he wanted to see what they would do. And so what we're seeing are the moments before they are told that they're not going to be killed. These are the moments where they are walking to sacrifice. And it's really a powerful story. But then you get into the actual statue and how it came to be. So the city of Calais wanted to commemorate the head of the city council, the chief burgher, Eustace de Saint-Père. And they asked Rodin to make a statue of Eustace de Saint-Père. And he says, okay. And he sculpts them in their various, they're thin, they're malnourished, their city has been sieged, there are terrible things happening. There are, the six of them, and they're together but alone. And he delivers it to the city of Calais, and they are not happy. Not happy. They were like, we wanted a statue up on a pedestal of Eustace de Saint-Père to commemorate his heroism in the 100 Years' War. And Rodin says, yeah, but you're wrong, because Eustace de Saint-Père was not the only one that sacrificed himself. And you want to commemorate one guy, but what about the other 5 guys that were part of this, that went with him to die? And they said, we want a statue of de Saint-Père on top of a pedestal. And Rodin was like, well, here's a statue of all 6 of them that's meant to be placed at ground level so that you can walk among them and see that they weren't men to put up on a pedestal. They were regular people just like you and me. And all of them were willing to sacrifice. And the people of Calais said, no. And so eventually it does come to be in the city of Calais, but it was not originally accepted by the city. And part of it is because Rodin believed very strongly in the story that he wanted to tell. He believed that the story that the city of Calais wanted to tell about Eustace de Saint-Père was not the full story. And so he gave them what he thought they should have and not what they ordered. And so here you get into a question that pops up so many times over the history of art. When you commission a piece, does the artist have to give you exactly what you want? Or should the artist give you what he thinks you should have? And the artists will tell you that they should give you what they think you should have, and the people that are paying will often say, well, I think that you should give me exactly what I want. And so that is the place where there's often a disconnect between artists and patrons. Now, what made the city of Calais commission this work in 1884? During the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, there was again this idea that that France had to be brave, and that Paris had to fight against these people that were starving them and treating them poorly, and they were outnumbered, and they fought bravely against the enemy. And so there are parallels between the 100 Years' War and what happened in Calais and the Franco-Prussian War and what happened in Paris. And so that's what leads the city of Calais to commission this work. Like I said, it now does sit, there is a copy at Calais, but there's a copy in the sculpture garden at the near the National Gallery of Art, outside the Hirshhorn Museum and the National Gallery of Art, which I think I'm pretty positive is always open. So this is one of those pieces where you could just walk down and go see it. And you will see when you get there the importance of it being on the ground, and the importance of the circular composition. It's a really, really beautiful piece. Rodin did a lot of really famous stuff, but this is without a doubt my favorite. And I think that the level of emotion that is put into it is unmatched in pretty much any of his other works. So that, my friends, is the end of our late Europe video number 4, our second video on Romanticism. And I will see you next time for a video on realism. See you then. Bye.